What if love wasn't about swiping right, but about jousting in armor? What if your parents, not your heart, picked your future spouse? Welcome to the wild, complicated, and often surprising world of medieval love, roughly between the 11th and 14th centuries. Number 9. The Code of Chivalry and Courtly Love. In the realm of medieval romance, there was a secret handshake, a hidden language, a whole textbook on how to be a proper lover. This was the Code of Chivalry, which gave birth to something called courtly love, or fin amour, as it was known in the elegant language of the troubadours. This wasn't the kind of love you see in a modern romantic comedy, all soft glances and whispered sweet nothings. This was a love that was often unconsummated, almost always illicit, and utterly devoted. The knight, the brave warrior in shining armor, was expected to dedicate his entire being, his every deed, to a noble lady. This lady was often married to someone else, usually a lord or a powerful figure, making the whole situation wonderfully, or perhaps terribly complicated. Core of courtly love revolved around the idea of the knight's service. He was not just fighting for his lord or for glory, he was fighting for her. Her beauty, her virtue, her slightest favor, were his ultimate reward. He would wear her colors in a tournament, carry her token into battle, and compose songs in her honor. This wasn't about getting married and living happily ever after. In fact, marriage was seen as a practical arrangement, often devoid of passionate love, designed to secure alliances and produce heirs. True, burning love, the kind that inspired poetry and heroic quests, existed outside the bonds of matrimony. This distinction was key. Think about the tales of Lancelot and Queen Guinevere, a legendary pair from the Arthurian cycle. Lancelot, the greatest knight of the Round Table, dedicated his life to King Arthur, yet his deepest, most profound love was for Guinevere, Arthur's queen. Their love was passionate, all-consuming, and tragically forbidden. Every one of Lancelot's heroic feats, every dragon slain, every villain vanquished, was ultimately for her. He would suffer great pains, endured terrible trials, all for a fleeting moment in her presence, or a simple nod of approval. This was the ideal, the knight perfecting himself, his valor, and his morality for the sake of his lady. Another famous example is Tristan and Isolde. Their love, born from a magic potion, was an overpowering force that defied all societal norms, and even the king's authority. Theirs was a love filled with longing, separation, and ultimately, doom. Yet it was precisely this tragic, unattainable nature that made it so celebrated in medieval literature. It was a love that elevated the lovers, even as it destroyed them. The rules of courtly love were often discussed and debated in real life. Courts, especially in the south of France, and later in Champagne, places like the court of Marie de Champagne, the daughter of the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine. These courts were centers of culture, where troubadours sang their intricate poems, and knights refined their manners. There were even courts of love, though their exact nature is debated by historians, where ladies would supposedly sit in judgment over dilemmas of love. Was it better to love a married woman or a maiden? Could true love exist within marriage? These were the kinds of questions that occupy the minds of the medieval elite. The influence of courtly love wasn't just confined to the grand castles and noble courts. It seeped into the very fabric of society, shaping ideals of masculinity and femininity. A knight wasn't just strong, he was courteous, eloquent, and deeply devoted to his chosen lady. A lady wasn't just beautiful, she was intelligent, refined, and a source of inspiration. It set a standard, an almost impossible standard for romantic devotion. A standard that resonated through centuries of literature and art. This was not a quick fling. This was a lifelong dedication to an ideal, a performance of profound passion, even if the object of that passion remained eternally out of reach, like a distant star. Number 8. The role of the troubadour. In the sun-drenched lands of Aquitania, a region now known as southern France, a new kind of artist emerged in the 11th century, the troubadour. These were not just musicians or poets. They were the rock stars, the influencers, the chroniclers of love in the medieval age. Their songs, called cansos, were intricate, often complex, and deeply focused on the themes of courtly love. They didn't just sing about love. They shaped the very definition of it for their audience, influencing how nobles and even common folk understood romantic devotion. The troubadour was often a knight himself, or at least a man of noble birth, trained in the arts of poetry, music, and performance. They would travel from castle to castle, captivating audiences with their verses. Their primary subject was Shinamar, the refined, idealized love that was so central to the courtly ideal. They sang of longing, of the suffering, of the lover, of the unattainable beauty and virtue of the lady, and the supreme joy of her slightest acknowledgement. The lady was often referred to by a senhal, a secret name or pseudonym, to protect her identity, especially if she was a noblewoman to whom the troubadour was expressing illicit devotion. Consider the verses of Bernard de Ventadorn, one of the most famous troubadours. He sang with exquisite sensitivity about the pains and pleasures of love, often lamenting his unrequited feelings for a lady of high status. His poetry expressed the profound humility of the lover before his lady, a common trope in troubadour lyrics. He would speak of how her beauty made him weep, how her indifference caused him torment, and how her kindness brought him to ecstasy. This wasn't just poetry, it was a deeply emotional and intellectual exploration of the experience of love. The troubadours established a highly stylized form of expression. Their poems often followed strict metrical patterns and rhyme schemes, demonstrating their skill and intellect. The language itself was a refined form of Occitan, a lyrical tongue perfectly suited for their poetic endeavors. They used rich metaphors and allegories, comparing the lady to a guiding star, a precious jewel, or a divine being. The love they sang about was not earthy or carnal, it was spiritual, a path to moral improvement and even a form of worship. But the troubadour's role wasn't just to sing about love. They were also often social commentators, sometimes even offering political advice or critiquing societal norms, all wrapped in the guise of their love songs. Their performances were a central part of aristocratic entertainment and culture. They were patronized by powerful figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen who herself was a significant patron of the arts and a central figure in the development of courtly culture. Her court, and later that of her daughter Marie de Champaume, became incubators for this new form of artistic expression, attracting troubadours from across Europe. These poets did more than just entertain. They established a literary tradition that would spread across Europe, influencing poets in northern France, Germany, where they were known as minnesingers, and even Italy. Their themes and stylistic innovations laid the groundwork for future literary movements, shaping how love was understood and expressed in Western culture for centuries to come. They taught that true love involved suffering, dedication, and an almost religious devotion to the beloved. Their songs became the soundtrack to the romantic ideals of the medieval world, shaping the dreams and desires of generations of lovers. They didn't just tell stories, they built a universe where love was the ultimate quest, and the troubadour was its eloquent chronicler. Their legacy is a testament to the power of words and music to define the deepest human emotions. Number 7. Marriage is alliance, not affection. Forget any notions of whirlwind romances leading to happily ever after. When you think about medieval marriage, especially among the nobility, for most people living in the castle or manor house, marriage was not primarily about love, personal happiness, or even mutual attraction. It was a strategic, practical, and often ruthless affair, designed to secure power, land, and political alliances. Love, if it came at all, was a bonus, a pleasant side effect rather than a prerequisite. Consider a young noblewoman perhaps no older than 12 or 14. Her future was often decided for her before she could even understand the implications. Her parents or her guardian, if she was an orphan, would look at potential suitors not for their charm or kindness, but for their family's wealth, their land holdings, their military strength, and their political connection. A marriage could end feuds between warring families, unite kingdoms, or consolidate vast estates. A young duke might marry a countess from a neighboring territory to prevent future conflicts or to gain access to valuable resources. The concept of a dowry was central to these arrangements. The dowry was a sum of money, goods, or land that the bride's family brought into the marriage. It was essentially her contribution to the marital estate, and it could be enormous for a high-ranking noblewoman. This dowry was often crucial for the groom's family, as it could provide much-needed capital for military campaigns, building projects, or simply maintaining their lavish lifestyle. Without a sufficient dowry, even a beautiful and virtuous woman might struggle to find a suitable match. On the other side of the ledger was the dower. This was the portion of the husband's property that a wife was entitled to for her support. If she became a widow, it was her economic security ensuring she wouldn't be left destitute after her husband's death. The dower often amounted to a third of the husband's lands or income. Negotiations over dowry and dower could be incredibly complex, involving layers of lawyers and detailed contracts, sometimes taking months or even years to finalize. It was less about romance and more about real estate and finances. Royal marriages were perhaps the most extreme examples of this strategic approach. Kings and queens were often married off to cement international treaties or to expand their influence. Take Eleanor of Castile, who married the future King Edward I of England when she was just 9 years old. Their marriage was arranged to settle a dispute over Gascony, a valuable English possession in France. While their marriage eventually blossomed into a rare example of genuine affection, its origins were purely political. Their union helped secure peace and strengthen the English crown's position. Another instance involved the countless alliances made during the Crusades. European noble families would marry into families from the Crusader states in the Levant to bolster their presence and maintain control over conquered territories. These marriages were often hurried and pragmatic, driven by the immediate need for manpower and resources in a hostile environment. Even among the lower nobility and wealthy commoners, practical considerations often outweighed personal feeling. A successful merchant might seek to marry his daughter to a lesser noble to gain social status, while a noble family might marry their son to a merchant's daughter to gain access to her family's wealth. The idea of love matches was largely confined to literature, and even then often depicted as fraught with peril and tragedy. For many medieval individuals, the person they married was simply the person with whom they would manage a household, raise children, and navigate the social and economic landscape of their time. Emotional connection, if it developed, was a slow burn, built on shared responsibilities and mutual respect, rather than initial passion. It was a reminder that in a world defined by power, survival, and lineage, love was a luxury, not a necessity. In the grand scheme of marriage. Number 6. The tournament field as a stage for love. Step into the roaring stands of a medieval tournament, and you are stepping into a spectacle that was far more than just a brutal display of martial prowess. It was a grand theatrical stage, a catwalk for chivalry, and a crucial arena for the rules of engagement in medieval love. Knights didn't just fight for glory or their lord's favor. They fought, often fiercely, for the approving gaze of a lady, a single ribbon, or a quiet compliment. Imagine the scene. Thousands of spectators, banners snapping in the wind, the thundering hooves of armored horses, the clash of lances. At the center of it all were the knights, clad in steel, ready to prove their worth. But perhaps even more important than the roar of the crowd was the silent, watchful attention of the ladies. Often seated in elevated stands, their colorful gowns a vivid contrast to the dirt and steel of the arena. A knight's performance in the lists was a direct reflection of his devotion to his lady. Before a joust, a knight might ride past the stands, bowing to a particular lady, perhaps catching her eye. She might in return bestow upon him a small token of her favor: a sleeve from her dress, a scarf, a glove, or a piece of embroidery. This token, worn on his helmet or attached to his lance, was a visible sign of his dedication and her encouragement. It was a silent declaration to the world and to his lady that his deeds were for her. The greater his success in the tournament, the more honor he brought to himself and by extension to his chosen lady. A broken lance, a well-aimed strike, an opponent unhorsed. These were not just points scored. They were demonstrations of his strength, skill, and unwavering commitment. The knight was literally risking his life and limb, enduring hardship and pain, all to gain her admiration and possibly her affection. The ideal of courtly love, where the knight suffered for his lady's sake, found its most physical expression on the tournament field. Tales of Lancelot and his devotion to Queen Guinevere often featured such scenes. Lancelot, despite his immense skill, would sometimes deliberately lose a joust or suffer minor setbacks just to prove his humility and devotion. Or, conversely, he might ride into a tournament under a disguised identity, performing miraculous feats of arms only to reveal his identity to Guinevere, later thus highlighting that his glory was her glory, and his strength derived from his love for her. Tournaments also provided a rare opportunity for public interaction between knights and ladies. While formal conversations were limited by etiquette and the watchful eyes of chaperones, the tournament setting allowed for subtle exchanges: a shared glance, a polite nod, a whispered word of encouragement after a successful pass. These small interactions could hold immense significance in a world where overt displays of affection were forbidden. Especially here displays of affection were forbidden. Expertly, the prizes awarded at tournaments sometimes included a prize of beauty or a chaplet of honor, to be awarded to the most beautiful or virtuous lady, further cementing the link between martial prowess and female admiration. The lady chosen to present these awards was often a prominent noblewoman, adding to the prestige of the event and the knight's achievement. Ultimately, the tournament field was a microcosm of medieval chivalry and courtly love. It was a place where ideals of strength, courage, and devotion were enacted for a captivated audience. It was where a knight could publicly declare his passion through his actions, where a lady could bestow her subtle favor, and where the rules of medieval engagement played out with a dramatic flair, demonstrating that love, even if unrequited or forbidden, could inspire the greatest of deeds. It was a place where the lines between war and romance blurred, all in the pursuit of honor and a lady's smile. Number 5. The Church's watchful eye. While troubadours sang of passionate, often illicit love, and knights dedicated their jousts to unattainable ladies, there was another powerful force shaping medieval relationships: the Church. The Church's influence was vast and pervasive, touching every aspect of life, including the very definition of love, marriage, and acceptable behavior between men and women. Its pronouncements often stood in stark contrast to the ideals of courtly love, leading to a complex and often contradictory set of rules for medieval engagement. The Church saw marriage as a holy sacrament instituted by God, and primarily for the purpose of procreation and avoiding sin. It was meant to be a lifelong, indissoluble bond between one man and one woman. Marriage was considered the only legitimate outlet for sexual desire, and sexual activity outside of marriage was condemned as a grave sin. This meant that the passionate extramarital affairs celebrated in courtly love literature were in the eyes of the Church deeply sinful acts that endangered the souls of those involved. Clerical writers and theologians regularly warned against the dangers of lust and the temptations of the flesh. They emphasized chastity before marriage and fidelity within it. Adultery was considered a particularly heinous offense, not only because it violated the sacrament of marriage, but also because it could lead to confusion of lineage, which was a significant concern in a society where inheritance and family honor were paramount. The punishments for adultery, especially for women, could be severe, ranging from public humiliation to physical harm or even death in some regions. The Church also played a direct role in regulating who could marry whom. It established rules against consanguinity, meaning marriage between relatives who were too closely related by blood or marriage. These rules were often very broad, extending to distant cousins, and could be a significant obstacle to marriage for noble families who often intermarried within a small pool of eligible partners. Dispensation from the Pope was often required for such marriages, which could be a lengthy and expensive process, highlighting the Church's authority even in the most elite circles. Furthermore, the Church dictated the marriage ceremony itself. It moved the wedding ceremony from being a purely private contractual affair to a public sacred ritual performed by a priest at the church door. The mutual consent of the bride and groom, freely given, became a crucial element, though in practice, parental pressure often overshadowed true individual consent, especially for young noblewomen. The Church also enforced the concept of the impedimentum publicae honestatis, which meant that a betrothal, even if not fully a marriage, could create a spiritual affinity that prevented marriage to certain relatives of the betrothed. Despite its strong stance against illicit love, the Church did not completely stamp out the ideals of courtly love. Instead, there was a constant tension. Some religious writers tried to spiritualize courtly love, transforming the devotion to a worldly lady into a devotion to the Virgin Mary, or to God. The suffering and devotion of the knight could be reinterpreted as a model for Christian spiritual discipline. However, the core message of the Church remained clear. True love, sanctioned and blessed, existed within the confines of marriage, and any deviation was a perilous path. The Church's influence extended to discouraging even minor forms of romantic expression if they were perceived as leading to temptation. Young men and women were often segregated, and chaperones were common. Constant moralizing from pulpits and through written texts shaped a societal conscience that, at least publicly, upheld the sanctity of marriage and condemned its violations. This meant that medieval lovers, whether in real life or in literature, were always operating under the watchful, judging eye of a powerful institution that held immense sway over their souls and their daily lives. The rules of engagement for many were therefore not just social, but also deeply spiritual, with eternal consequences. Number 4. Love through letters and tokens. In an age before instant messaging, before video calls, and even before widespread literacy, how did medieval lovers express their deepest affections, plot their secret rendezvous, or simply keep the flames of passion alive across miles and months? They relied on the art of the written word and the subtle power of tangible tokens. This was a slow, deliberate, and often precarious form of communication, making every message and every gift incredibly precious. Letters, for those who could read and write, were the lifeline of distant lovers. While many common people were illiterate, nobles, clergy, and even some wealthy merchants had access to education and the ability to compose messages. These letters were not casual notes. They were often carefully crafted, following established poetic conventions and rhetorical flourishes. They might contain elaborate declarations of love, expressions of longing, descriptions of suffering and separation, or even coded messages for clandestine meetings. The famous correspondence between Heloise and Abelard, though tragic, stands as a powerful testament to the emotional depth and intellectual sophistication that could be conveyed through medieval letters. Their letters, written in Latin, reveal a complex relationship of intellectual partnership and passionate devotion, fraught with scandal and tragedy. The delivery of these letters was itself an intricate affair. There was no postal service as we know it. Messages would be entrusted to trusted servants, traveling merchants, or itinerant monks. The journey could be long and dangerous, and the risk of the letter falling into the wrong hands was ever present. A letter intercepted by a jealous spouse, a suspicious parent, or a rival could spell disaster for the lovers. Therefore, secrecy and discretion were paramount. Sometimes, a letter might be delivered by a minstrel or a jongleur who could also verbally convey messages and add a layer of performance to the communication. Beyond letters, tokens played an equally significant role. These were physical objects, often small and easily concealed, that carried immense symbolic meaning. A lady might give her knight a lock of her hair, a ribbon from her dress, a piece of embroidered cloth, or a jewel. The knight in turn might offer a ring, a carved trinket, or a piece of armor from a victorious battle. These tokens served as tangible reminders of the beloved, comforting objects to be cherished in their absence. These tokens were not just sentimental keepsakes. They were often seen as possessing almost magical power. A knight wearing his lady's scarf into battle believed it would protect him and bring him victory. The act of carrying her token was a constant, unspoken vow of his devotion. In the tales of King Arthur, it was common for knights to wear a lady's favor during tournaments, a sleeve or a veil tied to their helmets, a visible declaration of their inspiration. Literary works often featured these forms of communication. In the Roman de la Rose, a lengthy allegorical poem about love, the lover's quest for the rose, representing his beloved, involves a journey through a garden filled with symbolic encounters. But it also reflects the intricate dance of communication and longing. Though not direct letters, the allegories represented the internal dialogues and subtle external gestures that defined medieval courtship. These acts of sending letters and tokens were acts of bravery and trust. They required a vulnerability that modern communication often bypasses. Each message, each object, was a piece of the lovers themselves, sent into a world of uncertainty. They were the threads that wove together relationships, enduring absences, maintaining secrets, and fueling the enduring flame of medieval love in a world that often sought to constrain it. It was a testament to the human desire for connection, finding ways to bridge distances and societal barriers through the careful choice of words and the profound meaning imbued in small treasured objects. Number 3. The art of the grand gesture. If you wanted to impress your crush in the medieval world, a simple bouquet of flowers might not cut it. This was an era where the concept of going big was a fundamental rule of engagement in love, especially for the nobility. The grand gesture was not just a display of affection. It was a demonstration of wealth, power, bravery, and unwavering devotion. These were acts designed to capture attention, win favor, and sometimes rewrite the rules of destiny. One of the most obvious grand gestures for a knight was performing heroic deeds. This wasn't just about winning a tournament or a skirmish. It meant embarking on dangerous quests, fighting monstrous beasts, rescuing captives from dark fortresses, or leading armies into battle. A knight, returning victorious from a crusade, having fought for the Holy Land, might dedicate his exploits and spoils to his lady. Richard the Lionheart, a legendary crusader king, though his personal affections were complex, certainly embodied the ideal of a powerful ruler whose deeds resonated across Europe, potentially inspiring tales of romantic dedication. His very presence in the Holy Land was a grand, almost mythical gesture on a global scale. Another significant grand gesture was the building or commissioning of magnificent structures. Imagine a lord constructing a beautiful tower, a chapel, or even an entire castle, and dedicating it to his lady. These were not mere gifts. They were enduring monuments to his love and his power. Such acts were incredibly expensive and time-consuming, requiring vast resources and skilled labor. A building dedicated to a lady would serve as a constant visible reminder of the Lord's affection and his ability to command impressive feats of engineering and artistry. This was a gesture that literally reshaped the landscape. For the more artistically inclined, especially troubadours or noble poets, the grand gesture could take the form of composing epic poems or elaborate songs. These were not quick verses scribbled on a napkin. They were often lengthy, complex works of literature, full of allegories, classical allusions, and intricate rhyme schemes, sometimes designed to be performed publicly at court. The poet Guillaume de Machaut, a celebrated composer and poet of the 14th century, dedicated many of his elaborate musical and poetic works to his beloved Perron d'Armentières. These were not just private expressions. They were works intended for an audience, demonstrating his intellectual prowess and deep emotional engagement. Patronage of the arts could also be a grand gesture. A wealthy lord or lady might commission tapestries, illuminated manuscripts, or exquisite jewelry to be created or overtly, symbols or narratives that subtly or overtly referenced. The Roman de la Rose, a highly influential allegorical poem itself, became a text that was copied, illustrated, and circulated among the elite, reflecting and shaping their ideals of love and courtship. Owning a beautifully illuminated copy of such a text was a statement of cultural sophistication and often a subtle nod to the romantic inclinations of the owner. Even acts of personal sacrifice could be seen as grand gestures. A knight might undertake a lengthy pilgrimage, endure self-imposed exile, or engage in acts of penance, all to prove his worthiness and purify himself for his beloved. These were not light decisions. They often involved physical hardship, social isolation, and significant personal cost. The grand gesture in medieval love was about more than just expressing affection. It was about proving one's status, power, courage, and unwavering devotion. It was a public performance of love, meant to inspire admiration, envy, and ultimately the affection of the beloved. These acts were immortalized in song and story, becoming the stuff of legend, reinforcing the idea that true love demanded immense effort and sacrifice, and that nothing was too great a price to pay for the object of one's desire. Number 2. Forbidden love and its consequences. While the rules of engagement in medieval love often revolved around highly structured courtly ideals or pragmatic arranged marriages, human hearts then, as now, rarely followed strict blueprints. This led to a significant, often dramatic undercurrent of forbidden love relationships that defied societal norms, religious doctrine, or political expediency. Consequences for engaging in such love could be devastating, ranging from social disgrace to brutal punishment or even death. The most common form of forbidden love was adultery. As discussed, marriage was a sacred sacrament and a crucial social and economic contract. An affair, especially between a married noblewoman and a knight or another nobleman, was not just a sin against God, but also a direct challenge to the husband's authority, his lineage, and his honor. The potential for confusing inheritance, known as tainting the bloodline, was a particularly grave concern for noble families obsessed with legitimacy. The tales of Lancelot and Guinevere, while romanticized, perfectly illustrate the perilous nature of such a love. Their affair ultimately contributed to the downfall of King Arthur's realm, tearing apart the Round Table and leading to war. In real life, the repercussions could be equally dire. For the woman, discovery often meant public humiliation, imprisonment, or even death, especially if her husband was powerful and unforgiving. While men might face less severe legal consequences, their social standing could still be damaged, and they risked the wrath of an offended husband. Another form of forbidden love involved elopement. If a young noble couple wished to marry against their parents' wishes, or without proper permission, they might attempt to run away together. This was incredibly risky. Such an act was seen as a grave dishonor to both families, challenging parental authority and the carefully constructed network of alliances. The eloping couple would become outcasts, losing their inheritance and protection. They might be hunted down, separated, and forced into other marriages or monastic life. Tale of Aucassin and Nicolette, a medieval French conte fable, portrays the lengths to which young lovers might go to be together and the severe obstacles placed in their path by disapproving parents and societal expectations. Monks and nuns took vows of chastity, dedicating their lives to God. Yet human nature is complex, and stories of forbidden relationships between clergy and laypeople, or even between members of the clergy themselves, were not uncommon, though often hidden. The tragic story of Heloise and Abelard is a stark historical example. Abelard, a brilliant scholar, fell in love with his student, Heloise. Their secret relationship, which produced a child and a secret marriage, was eventually discovered, leading to Abelard's brutal castration and both of them being forced into monastic life. Their enduring correspondence reveals a love that persisted despite profound suffering and forced separation. Social class was another formidable barrier. A romance between a nobleman and a commoner, while romanticized in some stories, was extremely rare and almost always fraught with difficulty. In reality, such a union would have been considered a mésalliance, an unsuitable marriage that would degrade the noble family's standing and endanger their inheritance. Children from such unions often faced illegitimacy and social ostracism. The concept of courtly love itself, with its emphasis on illicit affairs with married women, highlights the widespread nature of forbidden desires. While often idealized in poetry, the reality of such relationships involved constant fear of discovery, the pain of separation, and the moral quandaries imposed by society and the church. The consequences of forbidden love in the medieval period were not just abstract concepts. They were real, tangible threats that shaped the lives of individuals. They served as powerful deterrents, reinforcing the strict social and religious rules that govern marriage and relationships. Yet the very existence of so many tales and historical accounts of forbidden love speaks to the enduring human desire for connection that could transcend even the most severe societal constraints, often at a terrible cost. Number 1. The Cult of the Lady. At the very heart of medieval rules of engagement, especially within the aristocratic class, was the almost spiritual veneration of the noble lady. This wasn't just about finding someone attractive. It was about elevating women to an almost divine status, making them the ultimate source of inspiration, virtue, and moral guidance. This phenomenon, often called the cult of the lady, shaped how knights behaved, how poets wrote, and how love was idealized, often creating a paradoxical situation for women themselves. In the realm of courtly love, the lady was typically a woman of high birth, often married to a powerful lord. She was usually unattainable, distant, and often unaware of the knight's profound devotion, or at least she pretended to be. Her power lay not in her direct actions or social authority, but in her capacity to inspire. A knight would undertake dangerous quests, endure suffering, and refine his manners, all in the hope of gaining her fleeting glance, a gentle smile, or a small token of her favor. She was the sun around which his world revolved, the star that guided his moral compass. Qualities attributed to this idealized lady were not just physical beauty. She was expected to embody grace, intelligence, refinement, and impeccable virtue. She was the embodiment of perfection, a figure whose very presence elevated the knight's soul and spurred him to greater deeds of chivalry. Her beauty was often described in ethereal terms, less about earthly allure and more about a reflection of divine light. Poets, especially the troubadours, spent countless verses extolling these qualities, creating a literary archetype that became deeply ingrained in the medieval consciousness. This idealization of the lady had a profound impact on chivalry. Knights were taught that their courtesy, their bravery, and their generosity were all performed for the lady. They were expected to defend her honor, protect all women, and champion justice in her name. Concept of prowess, military skill, was intrinsically linked with courtesy, refined manners, and respect for women. A truly chivalrous knight was not just a fierce warrior, but also a gentle, eloquent, and devoted admirer of women. The Arthurian legends are replete with examples of knights who dedicate their entire lives to the service and protection of noblewomen, often enduring great personal sacrifice. However, this cult of the lady presented a fascinating paradox. While women were elevated to an almost worshipful status in literature and ideals, their actual agency and power in society were often limited. Noblewomen particularly were instruments of political alliances, their marriages arranged for dynastic purposes, often with little regard for their personal feelings. They were seen as custodians of family honor and producers of heirs. They commanded large households, managed estates in their husband's absence, and wielded considerable indirect influence. But their public and legal roles were often constrained by patriarchal structures. Yet within the courtly sphere, the lady held immense symbolic power. Her approval could make or break a knight's reputation. Her disdain could lead to despair. She was the judge of courtly manners and the arbiter of taste. The very existence of the courts of love, where ladies purportedly judged matters of the heart, reflects this perceived authority. Even if such courts were more literary construct than legal reality, cult of the lady also influenced the development of art and literature. Illuminated manuscripts, tapestries, and carvings often depicted noblewomen in elegant settings, embodying the ideals of beauty and grace. The stories of courtly love with the lady at their center became popular entertainment, shaping the collective imagination and perpetuating the ideal of unattainable, inspiring female perfection. This widespread veneration of the lady, while not always aligning with the practical realities of medieval life for women, undeniably shaped the rules of engagement. It established a framework where romantic love, even when forbidden, was inextricably linked to profound respect, dedication, and the relentless pursuit of an ideal. Created a world where the power of a woman's beauty and virtue could inspire men to extraordinary feats, making her the ultimate prize and the eternal muse in the intricate dance of medieval love.